My name's Prajnamanas, and I'm going to be carrying on a series that Kashmitra started last week. As you might know, you can drop into any of these classes, but we're usually moving through a kind of series of topics from Buddhist tradition. So, these 5 weeks, we're doing what we've called the 5 powers of the mind. I think I've confused the Dharma Night team by changing the traditional name. They're normally called the 5 spiritual faculties. Anyway, there's a reason it's normally called that, and a reason that I kind of gave it a different name, especially for the titles on YouTube. Anyway, can you allow them to see this? This is my attempt to write in nice giant board writing. I don't know if you can actually read it. 5 powers of the mind, or the 5 spiritual faculties. What I'm going to do, this is a classic Buddhist teaching, by the way. It's really core, I hope really simple, and helps you actually measure what's happening in your mind and some of the next ways in which you need to grow. So it's pretty easy to remember. It is a list of 5 things, so slightly harder than some of the really tiny lists, but what I'm going to do is reintroduce that generally and then talk about one of them that's sometimes called energy. The Sanskrit word is virya, sometimes energy in pursuit of the good, etc. But anyway, just something on these 5 spiritual faculties first. So, my fabulous flip chart page that I made earlier is here. So these 5 faculties, let's just call them for the moment. I'll say what they are quickly. Energy, concentration, faith, wisdom, and there's one that's missing, but we'll come back to that. Okay? And this is one way of laying them out, in which they're in pairs. Okay? You can probably tell these are basically, without going into the nuances of exactly what the words mean and what we mean by faith, which isn't what some traditions would mean by it, you can tell these are probably basically positive things to cultivate, things that we want if we want to pursue a spiritual life, if we want the mind to be alive, etc. They're laid out like this because you've got complementary pairs. Okay? So if you've got energy, that sounds quite active, doesn't it? And concentration, that's a translation for a word for meditation. Okay? So there you've got something very active, there you've got something contemplative. Faith and wisdom, and there's always more to this, but this is just a really nice simple way to remember it, okay? If faith is basically your emotional response to the ideal, so if you, for example, feel moved when you see a Buddha figure, that's an experience of what a Buddhist would call faith. It doesn't mean you believe in a deity or anything like that for the moment. If that's basically an emotional response or a felt quality, you've got balancing it wisdom, okay? Which we understand often as something intellectual. Hopefully I'll be sort of undermining slightly these initial sort of surface interpretations, but they're helpful because you can remember these as 2 pairs, okay? Energy, concentration, faith and wisdom. One way of laying them out. Now does anyone, and it's cheating if you're an order member, know which one's missing?
Is it patience?
No. Not unrelated.
Metta?
No. They're all good guesses, yeah.
Confidence?
No, I'd include that in faith. We could come back to that.
Mindfulness.
Yes, where was that? Mark. Very good. Mindfulness. Let me write that up. On my set of 6 flip chart pens that Philippa got me. And why is that one in the middle, do you think?
It's the one that links the other 4.
Links them, yeah. Slightly more than that.
Supports them.
Supports them, yeah.
Is it when that they're all in balance that you're mindful?
Yeah, if you like, you're all right, but that's the idea I was looking for, is that it balances all of them. So in this kind of basic scheme, you can see, say these are like the cardinal points or something, you could go too far in one direction and just be really, really energetic and active, and your mind's not cultivating any depth. Yeah? Or think terribly much about the tradition and exactly what it's saying, and forget to involve your emotions. So mindfulness, in a sense, applies to all of them, and probably I don't know if it governs all of them anyway, it balances all of them, mindfulness. Yeah? So that's kind of that's kind of our fulcrum in this scheme. There's another way you can draw this, where mindfulness, you just sort of draw it all the way around the outside to suggest that the medium that all of this is swimming in is mindfulness. If you like, slightly different metaphor for the same thing, that mindfulness pervades all of them, or all of them eventually are soaked in mindfulness. Yep. So that's the 5 spiritual faculties. Now something about... and I've written their Sanskrit words here. I mean, I don't know if you need them, but virya, prajna, samadhi, shraddha. And this is smriti.
What's the Sanskrit for mindfulness?
It's hard to pronounce, but I think it's something like smriti. So SMR, and I believe that R's got a dot under it, TI. In Pali, it's sati. Okay.
In Pali, it's sati.
Yeah. Okay, so what these are called, one more thing about the tradition this comes from, is we call them faculties. Indriyas. Okay. Anyone know what that might be related to? No? Okay. I wouldn't have known either. So Indra, in the ancient Indian tradition, was the king of the gods. So what Indra came to mean was governing, or a governing principle, a governing or even dominating principle. Okay? And what this word's also used for in Buddhism is the senses. So this is where the link comes in, and this is why they're called faculties. If the king of the gods is in charge of everything and is sort of watching over it all, and these are ideally in spiritual life, these are intended to substitute in for what normally governs life, which is the senses. Okay? So it's sort of getting a little bit subtler now. Why would the senses normally govern life, would you say? Why is
Someone who's unawakened, they govern life.
Say again?
For someone who's unawakened, they govern their life.
Yes, yeah. Might even have to say we, I suppose. we, if we're unawakened. The senses govern life, did you say? Yeah. Okay, I'd agree with that. Yep. So, do the rest of you agree? Do the senses govern life? What might be meant?
Reaction to the senses govern, if you like.
Okay. What do you mean by reaction to the senses?
Well, basically, something happens, you add on a meaning to it, which is creates some suffering, and then you go and eat a hamburger or something because you want some happiness from somewhere, or whereas so you're just living in conditioned response without any. Without anything else coming in from the outside that can change that pattern.
Yeah, I think conditioned responses is part of the key to this. So something will happen in your sense experience which you basically either like or don't like. This is the mechanism of unconscious life. Something happens in our sense experience which we either like or don't like. If we like it, we try and go towards it and have more of it. If we don't like it, we do the opposite and try and get away from it, usually with more sense experience. You see what I mean? So, for example, when you wake up and your body's uncomfortable, you want to brush your teeth and have a cup of tea or something. Do you see what I mean? Very, very simple example. Something's happening in the senses which pings you into doing something else for the senses. So that's the manner in which it's meant that the senses are normally governing life, and the tradition here really means unenlightened life, which, like I'm suggesting, I'm pretty sure is all of us. You can come and tell me later if you don't think that's you. So if the senses ordinarily govern life, the idea of this scheme is that these eventually would govern your life, okay, and become the real indriyas. Do you see what I mean? The real governing principles, what you'd lead your life by and what you'd make your decisions according to with these qualities, and no longer the impulses of what happens to come in through your visual sense, taste, etc. Do you see what I mean? Does everyone get that? That you ping, the reactive mind basically pings between different sense experiences, usually looking to satisfy itself on that level. And a really, really big thing that the Buddhist tradition is saying is that ultimately that won't work. You can, of course, feel a bit empty, eat some really nice food, or get an extra hour's sleep, and very temporarily feel a bit better because you've given yourself some pleasure. And I'm not saying that, I don't do that, or you never should, or anything. The tradition's quite clear that that won't bring you ultimate satisfaction, okay? Because in a sense, you're stuck at the level of the senses. And in a healthy embodied life, of course, you need to be quite in touch with the senses. And we always start meditation by saying, in one way or another, feel the body. I could come back to you later, but won't do questions just yet. So you need to be in touch with your senses. But there's a lot to be said in Buddhist practice and in meditation practice for not taking them literally and being dominated by them. So part of what you do when you meditate, of course, is you hugely reduce your sense input. You see what I mean? You close your eyes, you're in a quiet room. I don't know, you've got no other input. The main thing, one of the main initial conditions about meditation, you just switch off all the input, don't you? And then you see what happens. And then you actually start seeing the mind. Then you start getting to know the raw material you particularly are working with on that day or over the course of your life. And you cultivate qualities that are not dominated by the senses, i.e. these. So that's part of what we're doing in meditation, is trying to conjure all of this and govern the mind according to higher values rather than what happened, the stimuli that happen to come in. Okay.
I just wanted to clarify, I appreciate it. I didn't mean unawakened, I meant unaware.
Unaware, yeah.
So someone who doesn't even know, didn't even start the path.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Like all of us here, I would say, is aware. That's why we're on the
Sure.
Eightfold Noble Path.
Yeah, I get you, yeah.
That's what I meant by that.
No, certainly, thank you, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And before I woke up and realized, oh my gosh, there's this suffering and continuous suffering, I don't know what it is, and I'm reading that there was clinging and attachment that kind of awoke me to that.
Yeah,
so
sure.
then I started walking the path.
Yeah, the whole thing is a process of becoming more conscious. And I would include coming away from the sort of literalism of the senses, if you see what I mean, which ultimately means believing that I'm made up of those. You see what I mean? Again, when you withdraw into the seclusion of the mind in meditation, you start to query your ordinary idea of what you're made up of, which, if you think about it, is most of the time your sense impressions, or that's what we believe. This is calling on deeper qualities that will actually question the idea of anything that is you in a fixed sense anyway. Okay. But yeah, becoming more conscious and moving into awareness. So these are really to do with living a Buddhist life. They're not sort of abstract things that it's nice to have in the mind. They're more and more the way in which we want to live. So that's this scheme, which can sound a little bit abstract. Living according to the senses, living according to these. So the more we can cultivate these qualities, the more alive we will be. Just like there's a scale of how conscious and how aware we are, there's a scale of how alive we are. Probably you've all met somebody who you found really alive. I hope you have. And that suggests, doesn't it, that there's a sort of scale of aliveness, which is funny, because biologically, I suppose, we think it's either 0 or 1, either alive or not. That's the kind of medical definition, isn't it? Even that seems questionable in some corners, but you're becoming more and more alive through these things. So spontaneity and aliveness come in more and more the more we infuse our minds with these qualities, and the more they can be balanced. That balance is important. One scholar who our teacher looked up to a lot said it's as important as any of the qualities on their own. So the fact that you're doing what we sometimes call advancing on a broad front is really important. You see what I mean? And not just having loads and loads and loads of energy, or getting really, really, really into meditation and not paying attention to other qualities. Yeah, and creating a sort of unbalanced Dharma life. Okay. Oh yes, I forgot to complete this by saying Indriya means faculty. Yeah.
Mm.
So you've got a faculty of hearing, but this is saying why don't you have a faculty of energy, or more of a faculty of mindfulness, just like you have faculties. I think, I mean, this is a bit geeky of me, but I think it's a genius piece of translation, calling them the spiritual faculties, because it's replacing your ordinary faculties. You know, when you say someone's losing their faculties, for example, in that sense, they're saying replace them with these faculties and you cannot lose, in a sense. Okay. So I'm going to talk about this one at the top of the paper, energy or virya. So virya first. It's from the word vira, which means hero. Okay. Energy is quite a technical term, isn't it? It's also a very broad term. There's loads you can say about energies. It's a word that features in tons and tons of disciplines. But partly I've put this translation here, virya, so that you can see the word vira, which means hero or heroine. You might have to change the ending to make it heroine, I don't know. Vira. If you put a Y in a Sanskrit word before the last vowel, it means nus or hood or quality of. Yeah? So this means heroic quality. We've translated that quite often energy, but it's a little bit of a betrayal of it to call it energy on its own, because it's not just energy. It's not like chemical energy or feeling really charged up or getting lots done, which I'll come on to. So sometimes the translation you get is energy in pursuit of the good, okay, which is much more adequate. It's a bit of a mouthful and there's lots of hyphens, and it's probably easier to say virya. But this is energy in pursuit of the good, or energy in pursuit of the goal of nirvana, or enlightenment. It's a quite particular kind of energy. You could even say heroism. Yeah. So this is heroic energy, energy that breaks through negative obstacles, an energy that wants to grow. It's basically our energy to grow. There's a few facets to that. But I just want to bring the Buddha in for a minute, because if he's where the tradition springs from, it ought to be that any Buddhist quality, you can look for it in the Buddha's life. So, where's heroism or energy in the Buddha's life? Just one or two examples for anyone who knows.
Yes, having the bravery to initially leave his family.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, the bravery to go forth and leave the palace, leave his home life, and strive spiritually. Yeah.
To decide to teach the Dharma.
To decide to teach the Dharma. Yeah. Say why that's energetic or heroic.
Because when he first gained enlightenment, he wasn't initially sure whether he even could or not.
Yeah. Yes, so when the Buddha first gained enlightenment, he wasn't sure. My understanding is very slightly different to that. He wasn't sure he could, or he wasn't sure he was inclined to. Sort of wasn't sure he could quite bear to, because he thought it would be so difficult. Yeah, so once he'd gone to the sort of depths of his realization, he thought, some people are so far from this, it will be, I think he says, wearying and troublesome for me to basically an awful lot of bother to try to put some of this across. In a sense, I've gone so far that I don't know if I can tell people how to do it. So that's quite right, yeah. A heroic energy, nonetheless, to say, you know what, I will. Yeah.
He turns down leadership of the spiritual communities.
He turns down leadership of the spiritual communities, yeah, that he's encountered on his way to enlightenment and learned some meditation practices from. Yeah, thanks, Darren. Why is that energetic or heroic in particular?
Because he would have got a lot of validation from being in charge of these spiritual communities, would have had high status, needed energy to pull himself away from that orbit and concentrate on his goal, because they weren't going to get him where he wanted to get.
Yes, okay, yeah, lots of energy to say no thank you to status and keep pursuing something. That's probably the energetic bit, isn't it? To carry on after that, having been offered something, some quite luxurious sort of a position in the spiritual community. Yeah. Anything else? I know not all of you will know the Buddha's life story, but we're putting it together.
Deciding to sit
underneath the tree until you attain enlightenment.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that one was in my mind. Deciding to sit under the Bodhi trees, it became known, until he gained enlightenment. So I want to carry on from there. Thank you. What's your name?
Elisa.
Elisa, that's it. Yeah, thanks for that. The most heroic part of the story for me is where he's tried lots of different things. In a sense, he's tried luxury at the beginning of his life in the palace, which he leaves. He's tried the meditation teachers he encounters. They realise he's attained the same as them, say, would you like to lead this community? He says, no thank you, keeps going. Tried ascetic practices, which again I might come back to, they haven't worked, like denying yourself food and so on. And it looks to me as though he's almost given up. I mean, he's almost starved himself to death by discipline of a sort of wrong spiritual path as he comes to see it, which is huge energy anyway. But then he has a kind of intuition of what's called the middle way, sits down under a tree and says, I think it is, may blood dry up and may flesh wither. I can't get the grammar right. I won't leave this spot until I leave enlightenment. I won't leave this spot until I gain enlightenment. Otherwise, may blood dry up or may flesh wither. And he means his blood and his flesh, as in, I'm either now going to get enlightened or die. I won't get up from here unenlightened. I prefer to let myself die at this point than do that. So immense heroism at that point, immense energy. And he sits under the Bodhi tree for a long, long time, basically deepening his mind. A part of the reason I wanted to bring this episode in particular is that in some currents of our thinking and in some corners, some conversations you hear, striving is a bit inimical to Buddhism. And I just want to debunk that idea. I was talking with somebody once about this vow of the Buddha's, and this person said, that sounds to me a bit like striving. It was quite clear from the context, that's not a good thing. As in, I'm not very keen on that episode, or I don't want us to discuss it too much more, because that sounds to me like striving. I was, in a sense, very struck by two things. One is that striving itself was a sort of clearly a dirty word, and the other was that didn't seem to belong in this person's idea of the Buddhist story or the Buddhist tradition. But, oh my goodness, does spiritual life require it? Now, I know, we need to look after our well-being. Meditation, you need to really relax. A genuinely relaxed and confident person is a lovely person to be around. So I don't mean that you need to become really hard-nosed and kind of high-achieving in the Sangha. Hopefully the Sangha will sort of knock all those corners off a person and polish them up a bit more into something more genuinely relaxed but confident. You could say real relaxation is actually quite energized. Samadhi, concentration again is a bit of a travesty of the word samadhi. Samadhi we sometimes translate as energized calm, which is partly intended to show that a deep state of meditation might be very relaxed, but that is a state of lots and lots of energy. That's why this balancing opposites thing it does fall apart, if you see what I mean, because it's not as if samadhi doesn't contain lots of energy. But perhaps I've given it away there, that the energy in samadhi is contained and kind of harnessed like a horse, if you see what I mean. It's well directed. That's why we need this balance. So the more energy we build up, the more we'll need a steady and deepening mind to direct the energy well. Otherwise it's just chaos, if you see what I mean. Energy is chaos without samadhi. How did I get onto that? Relaxed. So spiritual life definitely involves striving. We're going to need immense effort and energy if we're going to overcome the mind. The Buddha says in the Dhammapada, it is hard to tame the mind. So there's lots of metaphor in his texts, things like the Dhammapada. The metaphor there, of course, is a wild animal. It is hard to tame the mind. He goes further than that. In terms of this heroic energy stuff, there's another verse where he says, more valuable is conquering the mind than conquering 1,000 enemies in battle. The metaphor there obviously is battle. So he's saying the real conflict, the really worthwhile struggle, the really worthwhile battle is actually with your own mind. That doesn't mean you're in conflict with yourself. It means you want to overcome unskillful tendencies that you recognise you have, that you'll become gradually more aware of as you practice. Okay. Now, you might need to pick up different metaphors and myths for your spiritual life at different times, and if battle is really wrong for the moment, then fine. But I think we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater then and think that there's no struggle or no metaphorical battle on our hands. I personally would say that there is. You can, I don't think it's just me, meditate for quite some years and notice the same unskillful habits coming up in your mind again and again and again. Okay? It's not bad news, because it's really true that the more practice you surround that with, the more your experience of that will shift. I've been living in a community upstairs, for example, for 10 years in a couple of months, and in a sense, some of the same sort of slightly irritable ruminations came up 10 years ago when I moved in. And it's kind of embarrassing. And I think, wow, it's going to take a lot to conquer that particular tendency altogether. I mean, really uproot it so that it never happens. That's, in a sense, even that is quite a far goal. Again, don't be discouraged, because just to complete that story, I would say that I've got a lot fitter in relation to it. A bit like an athlete gets fit. My mind's a lot fitter around it now, recovers a lot more quickly, friendlier response, better communication around it, etc. But when the chips are down and the mood is low and I'm really underslept, it's like going back to exactly the same place again. So you need tools not to get too discouraged, but you need to also remember, well, here's another metaphor, there are demons. We don't have time to go into this as a whole way of seeing things, but sometimes the tradition just talks about demons. There's demons in the mind, and they take a lot of taming. Okay, so we need to conjure energy for that task. Now, Bhante, our teacher, Bhante Sangharakshita, says that virya, or heroic energy, has got an outward aspect and an inward aspect. The outward one he deals with very quickly by just saying, as basically doing things to help others that might cause you trouble, was basically it. Putting yourself out, going to some trouble for other people and doing things that will help them. Okay, so you can probably furnish your own examples of that. Another thing worth looking at, I think, as your spiritual life goes on is, am I actually going out of my own way? Again, something you can see, I'm afraid it's easier to see in others than in ourselves, again, I'm sure I've done it, is you can start to refine your own routine around what you think works for you. You see what I mean? Exactly when you want to meditate, sleep, work, what you want to buy, you know what I mean? All that stuff that can be really good about when you need to go to bed and when you need to go on retreat and on holiday and all of that. If you're not careful, spiritual life can turn into refined selfishness. Quite easy to happen, and it's subtle. It's like the distracted mind. It creeps in without you seeing it. So it's not exactly our fault, but we bring egotism into spiritual life with us. That's a truism, isn't it? I'm sure that's very obvious. We bring it in with us, and it works very subtly. So you can end up in refined selfishness. So very important to say every now and then, am I actually going out my own way here? I might have quite posh ideas about Buddhism. Maybe especially when I'm talking to some non-Buddhists, I'm quite chuffed to say, oh, that's what I do with my time, I go to a Buddhist centre and I've got some great Buddhist friends there. Actually, non-Buddhists are a good test, because they will be thinking, is there anything different about this guy or this person? Does he seem more kind or more aware than the last person I was talking to who's not interested in Buddhism at all? Quite a healthy test. Sangharakshita says, if you want to see how you're getting on with your meditation, go home and see your parents. Quite good it was a joke, isn't it? But it's a little teaching as well. Test yourself. How far are you going out your own way? How much can you serve others without them thinking, what an excellent Buddhist that person is, just for them? But I want to talk a bit more about the inward aspect of virya, or energy, or determination. So this maps, if you like, to something in the Noble Eightfold Path, which you might have heard of. So does anybody know, for a bonus point, which limb of the Noble Eightfold Path this is related to? Effort, yeah. Right effort or perfect effort. So effort, that's another term we're bringing in, isn't it? Can sound unattractive. I was remembering earlier when we were at school, when I was in my teens at school, we said that something was a bit of an effort if we meant we didn't like it very much. I didn't realise that was just our slang. So, how was that thing? It was all right, but it was a bit of an effort. It means I didn't enjoy it. But that just goes to show, at least those teenage boys found the idea of effort unappealing. Didn't like going to effort. So what would perfect effort be? What's effort if you're making effort really, really well? Does anyone except Dara? No. And this is inward, okay? This is your efforts internally.
I guess if I'm putting too much effort in it, I might feel restless and anxious. If I'm putting too little effort, I might fall asleep or become very relaxed. And I guess it's a lot like, I think this is a metaphor already, but tightening the bow on a violin string or something like that.
Yeah, great, exactly. So you're talking about balanced effort there, which is great. We often talk about that in meditation. Too much, it's all a bit hard or a bit high. Too much, it's too little, it's a bit sluggish and low. And there is a metaphor in the canon of a well-tuned instrument, a string that's tuned to the right frequency, isn't there? So it resonates with the right note. Yeah. There's something more specific even that I'm thinking of.
I think I'm slightly different in that. For me, effort, I'm at a stage where there's some sort of letting go, and the effort happens, and it's like no effort in the effort. It's just a turning up, and a turning towards, and then I don't have to tune the string. The string's already tuned.
Okay.
So if I put any effort in, I'm going to ruin it.
If you're putting effort in, you're going to ruin it. Okay. That's probably one emphasis, isn't it? That sometimes what's called for is something very receptive and held back. Sometimes, yeah. Anything else?
Do we like effort without ego attached to it?
Yeah. Yes, I think ultimately it probably is effort without ego. That's right. Yeah, just well-directed, mature effort. Anyway, I'll give the game away because this bonus point's too difficult. What I'm thinking of is what's called the 4 right efforts. I think I'll write those up actually. So this is with regard to mental states. So what might you need to do with negative mental states? What might you need to do to
Eradicate.
Eradicate, thank you. Unskillful mental states. So this is the first of the 4 right efforts, is eradicating unskillful states. So if you feel really greedy or really angry, you need to find a way to get rid of that from the mind. Okay. So say you've done that, what you need to do next to stop it happening again?
Avoiding arising.
Avoid. Let's call it preventing. So preventing. So there's your sort of 2-part kit for negative mental states. Yeah. And then positive ones. What do you need to do? So say you're now in neutral. Cultivate. Yeah. Once you've cultivated it, maintain. Yeah. Okay. So that's your kind of 4-part kit for the mind. And that basically is how effort should be directed. Sounds very simple, probably takes lifetimes to perfect, but it's worth enumerating that these are all things we need to do. You see what I mean? You need to uproot from the mind the unskillful tendencies. Then, this one's a bit more strategic, isn't it? How am I going to avoid that happening again? Okay, so I got over my angry mood. But what do I need to put in place? This is a much longer question, really. What do I need to put in place to make that less likely? It's unrealistic to think, what do I put in place so that this never happens again, isn't it? But how do I make this less likely? That question could go huge, couldn't it? That could mean lifestyle changes. What do I need to put in my life to be less driven by sense pleasure or resentful or angry? Yeah? And then cultivate positive states and maintain them. That's a kind of mirror image, isn't it? I need to bring them about, and then I need to keep them alive. So effort in the spiritual life can basically be summed up like that. What are your responses to that so far?
Easier said than done.
What's the fourth one?
Maintaining positive mental states. Yeah, cultivating and then maintaining. So it's great cultivating a positive mental state, isn't it? Like you come to the Buddhist centre, do some metta bath, now have some tea, feel a bit better. I'm not parodying it, by the way, this is a really good thing to do. Sounds like I'm mocking you all. Much better. Then what happens? You know, you go to bed, get up again, and the habitual mind kicks back in. So you need ways of maintaining. It's only occurred to me now, but I'm just thinking, this preventing and maintaining, that's much more long range, isn't it? That's much more, like I'm saying, strategic. I know it's a corny business word, but let's go with it. These are more kind of urgent, the eradicating and cultivating, aren't they? What do I need to do right now? But preventing and maintaining are, how do I want to live my life, actually, to make these more likely? I mean, perhaps a more straightforward answer to that is something like going on retreat. I recognise, say, that I need to go on retreat regularly. Before I was a Buddhist, I would have thought that was maybe a bit weak or a bit dependent or something, as if I ought to be able to just cultivate a really positive mind just like that without changing anything. Now I'm, in a sense, more humble every year about my need to go regularly on retreat to keep my mind reasonably fit and open and healthy, and not let it go down its habitual little channels of negativity. Okay, so we talked a bit about striving. I just want to come back to the Buddha a bit and tell that bit of the story I skipped over. For a period, I don't know if it's years, someone can call out if they know, he practices asceticism, okay, with 5 companions. And that, like I say, was things like reducing your food down to such a low level. I think, frankly, it probably makes you hallucinate. They certainly did things which we now know just reduce oxygen to your brain. But they don't just reduce oxygen to your brain, because quite interesting things, I think, then start to happen. But they do things like hold their breath for an extremely long time. They're very, very thin, withered people, very dirty. They'd hold their bodies in particular positions for a really, really long time. They're basically trying to mortify the flesh and subdue the body so that the mind would take off. Like I say, it now looks as though if you don't breathe for a long time, your brain has less oxygen, and lots of research is starting to show that sometimes when your brain has less oxygen and less activity, it becomes more visionary for whatever reason. So it probably was a valid spiritual practice, actually. It's easy to laugh at the ascetics in this period of the Buddha's life. They're sort of, I don't know, gawky, emaciated cartoon characters sometimes in my mind. But really they were spiritual seekers who were trying to contact something that it looks as though, in some senses, I mean, I'm not recommending this, you really do come more into contact with when brain activity levels are lowered. I'm saying this partly because I've been reading this book about near-death experiences, which shows loads and loads of research of people where there's now no blood flow to their brain and they're medically dead for a couple of minutes or even longer, basically have a massive vision full of what we would call karma, in other words, the weight, the moral weight of your actions, for better and worse. That thing called a life review, where you can see all of your life in all its detail. And an immense sort of light of love and forgiveness permeating everything. It's incredible how many people report that. And the really valuable thing about it is why I'm just sort of recommending it as something to look into. I'm reading a book called After by Bruce Grayson, but there's loads of stuff on this, including a Netflix series. Is that this is a randomised sample of people who've had something like a car accident or a medical crisis, like just suddenly nearly bled to death during a routine operation. In other words, they're not people who fancy themselves as spiritual or have an idea that there's a God even, and they meet what in this would be terrifying liminal space, really deep bliss, and some sort of love pervading absolutely everything that is sort of reality. And it sounds like some of the deeper things that the Buddhist tradition says about what's really going on underneath that sense experience that we're so often trapped in. So that's, I just want to sort of send up a cheer for the Buddha's virya and energy in that phase. He didn't know the error at that point, but he poured immense energy into seeking and nearly died of it. Okay. Okay. One more thing, and then I'll start finishing. We've got quite a nice tradition in the language of Buddhism called near enemies. Okay, so that's where you've got really good quality that we all agree we want, like energy in pursuit of the good, etc. The near enemy is something that looks like that but isn't it, and is actually not so positive or might take you away from it. So does anyone know what the near enemy of virya might be? I haven't got a particular word in mind, just a particular quality. Aggression. Yeah, that's a good one. Aggression, I think it might be. Yeah. Tons of energy in aggression, isn't there? Yeah. And in a sense, aggression per se, before it's expressed negatively, might simply be energy that can be harnessed and used. Maybe aggression is something like clumsy energy. Yeah. It can become something like ill will, can't it? But in its rawer form, it's probably not yet. So I think that's a good one. Yeah. Aggression. Restlessness. That's right. Yeah. So why is that a near enemy?
Because the energy is not focused, it's kind of going in different directions.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, restless energy's badly directed, isn't it? Yeah. I'm going to say something very similar, which is neurotic activity. Neurotic levels of activity or neurotic types of activity. Or you could say valuing being busy in itself. If someone looks busy, they must be doing something good, if you see what I mean. Actually, it's gone. Anyway, virya can be perfectly contained. If you think about that let's get it back. No? Where's it gone? Energy here is very well contained. It's balanced by the samadhi, but it could go in loads of directions in a really well-directed direction. Or it could just be content. You could have loads of energy and not be doing anything. That's an important quality of virya. So neurotic activity, or being busy for the sake of it, always wanting to get things done, having loads of energy simply to do is not virya and is one of its near enemies. Yeah. And that's why it needs to be counterbalanced with samadhi. In the end, that's why they all need counterbalancing with each other. You probably eventually need some wisdom to know how to use your virya, wouldn't you? Faith in the ideal and emotional response to what is actually of value. So, one more remark about effort as well. I said it was unattractive to us when we were teenagers. I think there's a version of that you get now, which is where we've been doing a lot, possibly in a slightly undirected way, and we now want to make no effort and relax. And you can probably guess from the way I'm describing it, sometimes I think that doesn't quite work. Do you see what I mean? If you feel basically strain from something like your day of work, here's a little suggestion for you. I mean, I don't know exactly what card you need to play at what moment. But we think, I now want to make no effort and just sort of do what Jnana Archer calls blobbing out. I'd never heard that phrase before I came to the Buddhist Centre, but anyway, quite evocative, isn't it? Blob out, like do nothing, kind of slouch around. And if you notice that that's quite often not very satisfying. You get a weekend day with reasonably free of plans and sort of fritter it by relaxing. So Sangharakshita would say it might be that you simply need to direct your effort into something else now. So if you're really strained from your work and that's leaving you kind of drained, well, it might be that you need to put more effort into your friendships. You can always try this as a corrective. Or it might be that you need to put more effort in your meditation. You can do this with meditation as well. You think, oh, finally, a bit of rest. We don't have to do anything. And actually get really sluggish. And you can feel a sort of mild buzz of unskillfulness in a meditation where you're not really bothering doing it. And the skillful and the unskillful, in other words, an ethical quality, is worth bringing to your awareness even when you're meditating and not much is happening, because partly ethics is to do with what could I be doing with my time, with this meditation, rather than just, I'm not doing anyone any harm, so don't mind me, if you see what I mean. Actually, privately, inwardly, you can probably feel that's not very satisfying. Okay, so it's just a little suggestion there about if you think I've been making too much effort, I now need to not make effort. Next time you think something like that, think, actually, where do I need to direct my effort? Because I'd even say that rest and relaxation, this is going to sound really banal, rest and relaxation or time off actually requires effort if it's going to be satisfying. You need to cultivate it a bit. You need to cultivate some pleasures. You know what it's like. You need to plan enough, but not too much. You want to get to when you become free of duties, whether they're work or something else, and feel like you can put yourself into something. That's one of the reasons it's really important to keep in balance and not become drained, is that by the time you have finished doing your duty, you want to have a refreshed mind so that you can enjoy something, I don't know, a little bit that's still a little bit enriching, not just basically turn the TV on, which is sometimes handing our responsibility over to the TV. You see what I mean? So let's place the responsibility outside my mind in the screen and sort of give up for an hour. Okay. Finally, I want to, I've talked about the Buddha and I've talked about ordinary qualities that we want to cultivate, a bit about meditation and daily life. Somewhere between those, somewhere between the Buddha's life and our lives, or mine anyway, is the life of our teacher Sangharakshita. Without there being more time to go into this, maybe one of these evenings we should just tell his life story, spend a whole evening on that because it's so extraordinary. But he basically, from the moment he first happened to read a Buddhist sutra in a bookshop just off Charing Cross Road, his energy for the Buddhist life basically exploded. It never, well, that's the wrong metaphor, it took off like a rocket, never looked back. If you read his memoirs, there's 4 or 5 volumes of them. It's an exemplary account of energy in pursuit of good, of never really doubting that these are the values to pursue. It's just a matter of how you do it day to day. Rather than shall I or shan't I, simply, so there's no issue with vision, shall I or shan't I, simply an issue with strategy. How shall I go about that today? He was in India working among the ex-untouchables, so hundreds of thousands of the most impoverished, most oppressed Indians in the 1950s, the poorest people who were only allowed to do the most menial jobs, had converted to Buddhism just a number of weeks ago. One person was trying to persuade our teacher Sangharakshita to stay with him in a particular town. He had an instinct he needed to take a train in the other direction. When he got off the train, he was told that the leader of these ex-untouchables, who'd converted just weeks before, had died very suddenly. And he found himself among them. And just as an example of virya, I thought I'd read you what he says. I've got two little readings and then we'll finish. So he's recounting his experience during this time where he basically met the ex-untouchable, and worked with them and consoled them for the loss of their leader, which was a sort of both an emotionally kind of heartbreaking event for them. They'd just been lifted out of the worst poverty and oppression for the first time in history by a kind of visionary leader. Both a kind of heartbreaking thing and a sort of panic as to what they were going to do now. So Sangharakshita went and met with them and just spent days giving talks, consoling them, meeting with them, comforting them, giving them the Dharma, reassuring them that they'd now taken on cultivating all of this, they could trust that, and that they had a future. He says, I arrived exactly 1 hour before the news of Ambedkar's death was received. Immediately on receipt of the news, his followers came flocking to me. That same night, I addressed a mass meeting of more than 1 lakh of people, that's 100,000, now all Buddhists. It was really a touching sight to see them all shedding tears for their lost leader. In my speech, I emphasised the fact that his work must go on and Buddhism be propagated more vigorously than ever. Vigour, by the way, is one of the translations of virya. To cut a long story short, in the course of 4 days, I addressed nearly 30 mass meetings, and I think I can say without vanity that I created a tremendous impression. Dr. Ambedkar's followers told me that they felt my being there at that critical juncture was a miracle and that I had saved Nagpur for Buddhism. Had I not been there is no knowing what would have happened. At first, people felt that the end of the world had come. But after listening to my speeches, which were very strong indeed, they felt full of hope and courage and determined to work for the spread of Buddhism. And this is the bit where he's really describing, I think, a state of energy. On the last day of my visit, I gave no less than 11 lectures. Imagine that, 11 of these in a day. The last meeting was held at 1:30 in the morning when 15,000 people were converted to Buddhism. That's a meeting where 15,000 are converted and then he gives them an address, probably of an hour or even 2 hours. My own spiritual experience during this period was most peculiar. I felt that I was not a person, but an impersonal force. He means beyond the personal. Not a person, but an impersonal force. At one stage, I was working quite literally without any thought, just as one is in samadhi. You see, so that's down here. Also, I felt hardly any tiredness, certainly not at all what one would have expected from such tremendous strain. In fact, when I left Nagpur, I felt quite fresh and rested. So some years later, he's done a lot of his work in India. He's come back to England, found a pretty degenerate scene of Buddhism in England, stays here and decides not to stay in India to try and help out with Buddhism here, effectively gets kicked out of one of the main Buddhist institutions in London, basically for being homosexual, and defending the middle-class mores of the community there, and for doing things like growing his hair to about this length, because the upper middle-class English people of the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara wanted their Buddhist monks to have shaved heads, thank you. Okay, so they basically kicked him out, and he decided to found the movement that is our movement. Okay, so centres like this arose on the basis of being thrown out of an institution he realised he wasn't interested in. So he's received a letter in India, he's on a farewell tour there, saying, we don't want you back at the Hampstead Buddhist Vihara. And he thinks, right, I don't need you either. And they're kind of discussing an AGM, an annual general meeting of the charity coming up. Respectability has been invoked. So he's offended people's respectability. He thinks, well, I know how much I value your respectability then. And he sends a telegram from high up in the mountains in India. And I'll just read you it. So this is from someone who's slightly supporting him, but not being that bold with it. With a telegram, in the style of telegrams, says, thank you, support, stop. Glad you realise no evidence main allegation, stop. Not interested image, interested enlightenment. Supporters likewise, stop. Better split than united mediocrity, stop. Vihara tactics, disgraceful, stop. AGM opportunity good purge, stop. Wonder if you dare, stop. No intention being sacrificed. Combination Hinayana sterility, British respectability, stop. Not all your facts correct. writing immediately, stop, good luck. So there's a bit of virya in action. No doubt as to which direction to go in and complete commitment to it. So hopefully I've kind of conjured there a quality that we can admire and look up to, but also given a practical way with that, eradicating, preventing, cultivating, maintaining, that we can work with it day to day and try and have our minds governed more by these principles. Good. So next week we have a guest speaker, which is Ratna Prabha, who I think is still the chair of the North London Centre, not for long, talking about mindfulness, doing the middle of the circle. Okay, so thanks very much for listening, and do come back for that next week.